everyone, this is Engineer Miss Needles, and today I'm going to take you on a trip on the question train. To better understand what you have read when you're reading, you might want to stop and ask yourself some questions during your reading. You can ask them at the beginning of your reading, before you read, or you can ask them while you're reading, and you can even ask yourself questions after you read. Then try to answer the questions, and that will help you understand the story or the passage better. This also helps if you want to summarize or retell a book to your friend or teacher. Now, let me show you the question train. The question train, of course, has the engine, the big engine to pull all of the questions. There's my engine. Okay, the first question we're going to talk about is who. Get this going. There's the who. The who is a person or people or the characters in a story or a passage. So you might want to ask something like, who has the train set? Our second question word is what. What is a thing or an action that could be happening? A question might be, what is the name of that character? Or what is she doing? Okay, we have our when train car. When is a time. Now, this could be a time of the day. It could be a time like on the clock. What time does the train leave? At 1 o'clock. Or it could be a season, or it could be a time of day like in the morning or in the afternoon. So when is the question word about time. Our next one is where. Where is a question about location. Where does the train stop? That question will be answered with a location. Okay, now I'm going to go to the end of the train here. We have our train car, why. Why is going to ask about a cause or a reason. Why did the train stop? The train stopped because we are picking up other passengers. And our last car on the train is how. Now, how has a couple of different ways you can use this. You can use how for like how much is a train ticket? How many people fit on a train? Or it could be like steps in a process. How do you buy a ticket to a train? And then you might answer, first you find out where you want to go. Then you go on the computer and search that location. After that, pay your money and get your ticket, something like that. So this is our question train. Here are the question words. Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Now I'm going to read a story about trains. And while we read the story, I'm going to ask you some questions using some of these question words. All aboard! Doot doot! Now we're going to read a book about trains. It's called Mighty Machines, Trains, and it's published by Scholastic. A train is a big machine that moves on tracks. Okay, while I read, I'm going to stop and ask questions that can be answered in this book. So the first question I'm going to ask is, what is a train? A train is a big machine that moves on tracks. And tracks are a set of rails for a train to run on. You see the tracks there in the picture. A train has cars. The cars on a passenger train carry people. A passenger is a person that rides in a vehicle, like a train or a car. The cars on a freight train carry cargo. Here's a question. Here's a what question. What do the cars on a freight train carry? They carry cargo. Cargo is the load that is carried by the train. There's some cargo right there. A train has an engine. The engine pulls the cars. Here's a what question. What does the engine pull? The engine pulls the cars. An engine is a machine that uses energy to make something run or move. The train has an engineer. The engineer drives the train. Oh, now I can use a different question word because that's a person. I'm going to use who. Who drives the train? You're right. The engineer drives the train. The engine has a whistle. The whistle tells people the train is coming. Okay, the whistle has a loud, high sound when air is blown through it. But my question is, why? Why is there a whistle on this train? There's a whistle on this train because it tells people the train is coming. This bullet train goes very fast. And on this page, we can ask a how question. How fast does the bullet train go? It goes very fast. This subway train goes underground, under the ground. Here's a question. Where does the train go? This train goes under the ground. A train stops at the station. All aboard! Here's another where question. Where does the train stop? You're right, it's at the station. And a station is the stopping place for taking on or letting off passengers. I hope you enjoyed the book about trains. Here's a chart with all the question words that we just talked about. So let's go through these. We have who. Who is if you are asking about a person or people or characters in a story. What is asking about actions or things. When is asking about the time of day or the time of year. Where is asking about location. Why is asking for a reason or a cause. So a lot of times it has because and in the answer. And how, there's a variety of reasons why you would ask how. You could ask, how do you do something? And you need a step-by-step answer. You could ask, how many? How much? Or it could describe an action. So use these words when you're reading to ask yourself some questions. Okay, I'm so excited to share this book with you. This is a book from when I was a kid, and it's called Mr. Puffer Bill, Train Engineer. And this is about a train, but if you notice, there's a difference about this train than the ones that we just read. This train is from the past. In our social studies unit, we're starting to talk about past and present inventions. So this is a good way to see the difference of this train versus the one in the book that we just read. But this book is also mine from when I was a little girl. I even have my sister and I wrote our names in it. It's published in 1965. But I remember loving this book when I was a kid. So here's how it goes. Mr. Puffer Bill was an engineer on the Red Bird Railroad. He was very proud of his engine, Chuff, and all the railroad cars Chuff pulled. Rain or shine, they went from Cotton in the Valley up the steep mountains to Pumpkin Ridge and back again. Can you think of a question that goes with this part of the story? Let me think. Who was the engineer? Mr. Puffer. When the sun shone, Mr. Puffer Bill was happy to put his head out of Chuff's cab and watch the tracks ahead. Mr. Puffer Bill enjoyed the bright sun shining on his head. He liked to feel the warm wind whistling by his ears. But what happens when it rains? But sometimes the day was rainy and the wind was cold. When that happened, the rain hit the top of Mr. Puffer Bill's head. The wind turned his ears blue. Brrr! Mr. Puffer Bill was cold. Me, oh my, I do need a hat to keep my head and my ears warm, said Mr. Puffer Bill. So he tried on a straw hat, but it didn't keep his ears warm. Not at all. Poor guy. Here's a question. When did his ears turn blue? His ears turned blue when the wind blew. He tried on a tall silk hat, but every time it blew right off his head. He tried on a sailor's hat, but that looked rather silly. He was an engineer on a train, not a sailor on a ship. His wife's about to help him here. One day, Mrs. Puffer Bill had an idea. She gave Mr. Puffer Bill her red bandana to wear. He wrapped it neatly around his head. The bandana kept him warm, but he felt strange wearing it. An engineer should not wear a lady's bandana, said Mr. Puffer Bill. Okay, well, he felt embarrassed by wearing that. One stormy day, Mr. Puffer Bill wore Mrs. Puffer Bill's bandana to Pumpkin Ridge. He held onto the bandana very tight. Then Mr. Puffer Bill put his head out of Chuff's cab to watch the tracks ahead. And he saw, of all things, a cow standing on the tracks. She was standing there smack in the middle, eating a daisy. Goodness gracious, said Mr. Puffer Bill, and he tooted Chuff's whistle, loud and long. Okay, here's a question. Where was the cow standing? On the tracks. The cow jumped from the tracks. She said, moo, and opened her brown eyes wide. Here's a question. What did the cow do? She jumped from the tracks. Poor Mr. Puffer Bill was very upset by all this. I hope nothing more happens, he said, and he held on tight to Mrs. Puffer Bill's bandana. Then Mr. Puffer Bill watched the tracks ahead as Chuff went around a curve. Uh-oh. Gonna see something else. And he saw, of all things, 2 sheep. They were walking on the tracks, walking smack in the middle, looking for green grass. Goodness gracious, dear, oh dear, said Mr. Puffer Bill, and he tooted Chuff's whistle twice. Toot, toot. Okay, let's do a how. How many sheep were on the tracks? Very good, 2. How many times did he toot the horn? Toot, toot, 2. This made one sheep say, baa, and go to the right. It made the other sheep say, baa, baa, and go to the left. My, were they excited. Okay, here's a why question. Why were the sheep so excited? That's right, because the train was coming down the track. They had to get out of the way. Poor Mr. Puffer Bill was very, very upset by all this. I hope nothing more happens, he said, and he held on tight to Mrs. Puffer Bill's bandana. Then he watched the tracks ahead of Chuff as they went over the railroad bridge. And he saw, of all things, 3 white ducks waddling down the tracks, waddling smack in the middle, looking for a place to swim. Goodness gracious me, oh my, said Mr. Puffer Bill, and he tooted Chuff's whistle 3 times. Toot, toot, toot. Okay, here's a question. Why were the ducks in the middle of the track? right, they were waddling in the middle looking for a place to swim. This made the ducks waddle slowly off the tracks. They said quack, 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 right back at Mr. Pufferbill. My, they were silly. Poor Mr. Pufferbill, this was too much. He was so upset he forgot to hold on to Mrs. Pufferbill's bandana. Whoosh! The wind blew it from his head. Now the bandana lay on the ground somewhere between Cotton in the Valley and the top of Pumpkin Ridge. There it is, flying through the air. When Mr. Pufferbill came home, he sat in his cozy, warm kitchen. Mrs. Pufferbill gave him a cup of tea. In a rather quiet voice, Mr. Pufferbill said, "I lost your bandana." In a rather loud voice, Mr. Pufferbill said, "I am going to invent a hat that will stay on my head." Okay, this is the bandana. Oops, out in the meadow, and now this is him inventing. Mrs. Pufferbill gave Mr. Pufferbill a piece of cloth with blue and white stripes on it. Then Mr. Pufferbill sat at the kitchen table and started to invent. With Mrs. Pufferbill's needle and thread, he sewed this way and that on the cloth until he sewed a hat together. Mrs. Pufferbill was so proud Mr. Pufferbill knew how to invent. Mr. Pufferbill put on the hat he had invented and looked in the mirror. "Fine, just fine," said Mr. Pufferbill, "except my hat does not look like a hat. It looks like a cap." "Well, so it does," agreed Mrs. Pufferbill. There he is looking in the mirror. The next day when Mr. Pufferbill went to work, he pulled his new cap snug over his ears. The band that stretched to fit his head made the cap stay in place. The wind couldn't blow his cap off anymore, not even if he tooted Chuff's whistle at 1 cow, 2 sheep, and 3 ducks. Not ever. Here's a question. When did he go to work? The answer is the next day. And the big question is, why did he make this hat? He made this hat because the other hats did not serve the purpose of being an engineer. They didn't help keep him warm. They didn't help keep the sun off of his head or the rain off of his head. He needed a strong cap that would stay on his head. Mr. Pufferbill was so pleased with his new cap, he gave Chuff's whistle a toot-toot that echoed from Cotton in the Valley clear to the top of Pumpkin Ridge. Now, next time you see an engineer on a train, please look at the cap. It's just like the one Mr. Pufferbill invented not so long ago. That's just like my hat, boys and girls. Remember, when you're reading, you can use the question words to help you understand the story. And also, you can notice that the trains were different in the past than they are in the present. I hoot you have a wonderful day. Toot toot!